Hello and welcome to another video. This is Nicole Spohr and today I'm sharing this Be Happy Birthday trifold card featuring Honeybee Stamps and Simon Says Stamp products combined to make this really fun design. I'm a huge fan of trifold cards, especially when I don't have to do any masking. Because I'm using Bristol Smooth cardstock as my background and a fairly light color for my stenciling, I'm able to color over the stenciled images with some Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. I'm going to start with my 9x12 piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock and I'm going to trim it to 5.5 by 12 inches. This is going to create my card base. This particular card is going to open up landscape style, meaning we're going to create our beehive from top to bottom, so it's going to be a long card. At 4 inches and 8 inches, I like to make just tiny, very light little pencil marks. This gives me a good idea of where the card is going to have score lines later on. This is especially important because I don't want any of the bending or the scoring of the card to go through any of the main faces like on the bees. Next, I'm going to take the Honeybee Stamps Hexagon Pattern Stencil, and using the smaller of the two stencils, I've taped down my paper to my glass mat work surface, and I've also taped the stencil down. I'm going to apply Wild Honey Distress ink through the stencil, being careful not to apply it clear down to the very bottom. That's so that I can extend this. So after I have after I've stenciled, I'm going to line my stencil up with some that I've already inked, and I'm going to go ahead and ink the next part of my background. This is going to give me the seamless beehive honeycomb type of appearance. I'm also applying more ink in some areas and lighter ink in others. This is going to give me a nice variation in color all the way from the top to the bottom. We'll line this up one final time and apply the rest of the ink. I like to do my inking first, as the VersaFine ONYX black ink that I use for stamping the images on my card can smear. It does take a little bit longer to dry than a dye ink does, and so I generally like to do stenciling ahead of time and then just simply color over that. I'm going to remove my mask or my stencil and the post-it tape and spritz my background with water from a distress sprayer. Then I'm going to blot this dry with a paper towel. This is going to add some additional interest to the stenciled background. You can see where the water has whipped away part of the ink, leaving me with a really fun design. My other big tip is to not score your paper until you've done all of your coloring. Because I like to do one layer with these cards because it folds much nicer and mails much nicer that way, I do not score my card until the very last thing. This also ensures that the ink doesn't pool up around the score lines when I'm inking a background or coloring in the images. The next step is to lay out the images that I think I want to use for the design and get my placement. I knew that I wanted this to be a text-heavy card as well as really showcase 3 of the 4 bees from the Simon Says Stamp Be Happy stamp set. Because I really wanted this card to focus on the bees, which are a large size and would be really hard to fit within the typical A2 size card base, meaning a 4.25 by 5.5 inch card. That's part of the reason I opted to go with the much larger and longer card base with this extended scene card. I'm also going to combine sentiments from the Simon Says Stamp Be Happy stamp set with the Honeybee Stamps birthday stamp set. So all of those greetings that I've just added are from the Honeybee Stamps birthday stamp set. And then we've got 3 bees from the Simon Says Stamp Be Happy stamp set. And then I'll use a couple of small phrases from the Be Happy stamp set as well. I also want to use accessory images to fill in some of the white or open space on the design. Those images are going to include hearts, butterflies, the honey pot, and a cupcake. There's lots of options for this because you definitely do not have to make this a birthday card if you don't want to. Once I have everything laid out, I am going to take my background to my MISTI and I'm going to start stamping. I'm going to carefully move everything off to the side that I'm not going to stamp initially, and then I can bring it back in a little bit. One tip for this is to take a picture with your camera phone so that you remember where everything goes in case you get called away and have to go do something else in the middle of creating your card project. I've left the word birthday and then one of the bees and a butterfly. Originally I thought I would use a dye ink, but I decided to opt for the Distress Oxide ink in Wild Honey. I used regular Distress ink for my background, but I'm going to go with the Distress Oxide here as I really think it gives a much nicer solid stamped image. I did have to ink it up several times because the greeting is big and bold and I wanted to make sure it was really nice and crisp. The bee and the butterfly will be stamped with VersaFine ONYX black ink and colored with Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. Because this is a flat one-layer card and I don't want my colors to bleed through the cardstock to the backside, I really prefer to use zigs or colored pencils when creating these one-layer trifold cards. That way the back stays nice and white while the front is super fun and decorated. Next, I'm going to ink up the bumblebee and butterfly and stamp those beneath the word birthday. Then I will clean these stamps and move on to the next portion. I'm just going to work piece by piece until I fill the whole thing in. I've left in all the steps so you can see exactly how I put the whole thing together. I'm going to go ahead and stamp the rest of my sentiments here for the first part of the panel all at once, again using the Distress Oxide ink in Wild Honey. I really think it looks great against the Wild Honey background to have Wild Honey text on top. It also keeps the focus on the sentiments but on the images as well. I'm going to move my paper down a little bit and we're going to finish by stamping the bumblebee and the little bee trail up here in the upper right corner of the card. I wanted to make sure that the main part of the sentiment and a bee were in that first part or first little 4-inch area of the card so that when the recipient takes the card out of the envelope, they see a full scene and then it just extends to reveal more and more fun. That is one of my favorite things about trifolds is that you get the card and it looks beautiful, just the little 4 by 5.5 inch panel, but when you pull it open, it reveals even more cute images and extends the scene. I'm stamping the other bee trail and then I will stamp the rest of my text for my card with this Let's Celebrate stamp or sentiment from the Honeybee Stamps birthday stamp set, and then Because I Love You is from the Be Happy stamp set. We have a few more images to fill in the rest of the design and then we can start coloring it all in. We've got our cute little bumblebee down here at the bottom that's going to be holding a cupcake, a couple of hearts, a butterfly, and a honey pot. We also want to make sure and leave some space so that you can write a message to the recipient of this card. This is always the area where I still like to add some sort of decoration, but I also really want to have that space so you can write a handwritten message to whoever you're sending this card to. I'm going to stamp as many of the images here with one press of the MISTI as possible. I can get almost everything stamped here, minus the cupcake, and then I will add a couple of hearts up high. I wanted to have a little pop of red in that first little area of the card. We'll clean up all of these stamps and then move on to the next part. There's the cupcake, and then I did stamp those hearts off camera. I'm going to start by coloring in these hearts. I'm moving top to bottom, and I'm using a scrap piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock to protect my work surface and to not smear any ink. Remember how I mentioned earlier that the VersaFine ONYX black ink can stay wet for a while, as can the Distress Oxide ink. I don't want it to smear, so I'm using this scrap piece of paper to protect the work surface from my hand so I don't accidentally smear any of that ink. I'm coloring in right over the stenciled background. You might still get a little hint of yellow through there, but I think unless you really knew to look for it, you wouldn't necessarily notice. With the wings, I want to see some of the yellow through there, as it appears that the wings are transparent. I'm using English lavender on those wings and then blending out with my blender pen, making sure to clean that pen often to remove any excess ink. Distress ink, Distress Oxide inks, and Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers are all water-based markers, meaning that they are going to work together. It's one of the reasons I love using these two products together and not doing any masking. It saves tons of time and you're able to create amazing cards with these incredible results. I'm using natural gray and warm gray too for the black areas or gray areas on my bumblebee, and mustard and the blender pen for the yellow. Something a little different that I don't normally do. I usually kind of go for bright yellow and yellow for my bees, but I love how the mustard and the blender work out. Because I didn't really have a lighter color of marker that works with mustard, or at least not one that I particularly cared for, I used the blender pen to give me that variation in color and shading. I also used Pink Haze for the cheeks on my bumblebee, and I'm taking a white pen and a black pen and adding detail to those eyes. This awesome sparkle pen here from Spectrum Noir is going to add a shimmery finish to those wings that again will be completely flat. Oftentimes I will use Nuvo Crystal Drops and White Blizzard, but for this I really want my card to remain flat, so I used a product that has sparkle in it to color directly over those wings. Remember that the Spectrum Noir glitter pen or sparkle pen is going to be water-based as well, so it will pick up color. You're going to want to clean off the tip of this on a scrap piece of paper as well. I'm going to continue coloring. The rest of my bees are colored with the same colors of natural gray and warm gray too, with Pink Haze for the cheeks. I made a slight miscalculation here and I left it in because I wanted you to see how I fixed it. I went ahead and added my black glaze pen to the eyes, and I really should have waited till I was done coloring. I grabbed my pink pen and I went to add the pink and it made the black ink bleed. For whatever reason, it took a little bit longer to dry than normal, so I dabbed that up with a paper towel and it still wasn't dry and it bled again. So I completely just dabbed that up, moved away from it, and continued coloring. I will come back and add the pink to the cheeks in a little bit, and then I'm going to have to redo the eyes completely with my black pen. I always like to leave in those mistakes when they happen. So that you can see how to maybe fix your own mistakes. I added some white to the eyes, and I'll have to kind of go over the cheeks a few times. This bee gave me the most trouble, but I was really happy with the way I was able to fix it so I didn't have to start over from scratch. especially since most of the card is already done. Anytime I don't have to start over from scratch makes me super happy. Adding in that Spectrum Noir sparkle pen to the wings so they have a subtle shimmer to them. And then moving on down, let's go ahead and color in our final bumblebee with Natural Gray, Warm Gray 2, Mustard, and the blender. This time I'll make sure and do the pink cheeks first because these bees do have nice chubby little cheeks that I really like to add pink to because I think it makes their faces so super cute. And then when I'm all done coloring, I will add in the detail for the eyes. Going back in and working on the eyes makes all the difference, especially on any of the bees that might have their eyes overlap some of the stenciled background, as that's going to make their eyes yellow, which I didn't think looked super great. Because the face is done, I went in with my white pen and my black pen before adding that mustard color to the rest of the stripes on my cute little bumblebee. Aren't their faces just adorable? I love this stamp set and think it's so much fun. Again, some English lavender for the wings, and then the Spectrum Noir sparkle pen. It looks like I'm going to come back to that, and I went ahead and skipped over to do the hearts. You guys, if you follow me at all, know I always love a pop of red on almost every card I make. In this case, it comes in the form of these fun little hearts. The red scattered throughout really pops off of the yellow hexagon background. We have a couple of butterflies in the honey pot left, and this card is almost finished. I let this bumblebee's eyes sit while I colored the final one, and so I went in and added in the white highlights to the eyes, and I went back to the first bee and added those back in as well, which makes a big difference. For the butterflies, pardon me, I'm using peach pink and sugared almond pink with a little light blue. Also natural gray for the butterfly's body. For the honey pot and the honey, I used mustard in a blender, and then for the honey pot itself, I'm using mid-brown and oatmeal, and we're going to make a pink stripe around the honey pot with peach pink and sugared almond pink. I didn't want to introduce a ton of new colors into my card. I will be using cobalt blue and light blue for the cupcake wrapper, which when colored over the yellow gives it a little bit of a turquoise tint, which I think is kind of fun and goes really nicely with the card. We're going to make the frosting on the cupcake pink with peach pink and sugared almond pink, some orangey yellow sprinkles with the bright yellow zig pen, and then for the cupcake itself I used mustard in the blender. It's already colored over a yellow part of the background, so it just gives it a little bit more hint of color. Then I'm going to go in and add detail to the face with a white pen. Add in some white pen detail all over my bumblebees, just little highlights like I like to do to dress these up. Again, it keeps everything one layer, but it adds a fun little touch to these colored images. I would recommend to let this sit and dry for just a little bit, maybe even 30 minutes to an hour, just to make sure that all of the ink is very good and dry. Because remember, we used a lot of water-based inks that don't dry super quickly. Then I'm going to take my score buddy and I am going to score at 4 inches, flip it over and score from 4 inches from the bottom, and then I'm going to fold up the card and use my bone folder to make those creases nice and crisp. I'm being kind of careful because I was slightly worried that the ink might not be all the way dry. You could hit it with a heat tool if you wanted to ensure that this is completely dry. Then you can simply open and close and look how much fun that extended scene card is for the recipient. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this Be Happy Birthday Trifold Scene Card featuring Honeybee Stamps and Simon Says Stamp stamps. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Here are a couple more videos featuring Honeybee stamps and dies that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.